What happens when a morning television host refuses to back down from asking the tough questions that everyone else is too afraid to ask? Today, we witnessed one of the most explosive interviews in British television history as Lorraine Kelly went head-to-head with Prince Harry in a confrontation that escalated so dramatically. It ended with security being called and the Duke of Sussex storming off set. The tension was palpable from the very first question, and what unfolded next will shock you. Make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think about how this all went down, because this is a story you need to hear from start to finish. The morning started like any other on The Lorraine Show. The studio was buzzing with its usual energy. Cameras were rolling, and Lorraine Kelly sat across from Prince Harry with that familiar warm smile she reserves for high-profile guests. But within minutes, that smile would disappear, replaced by something far more intense. "Your Royal Highness, thank you for joining us this morning," Lorraine began, her voice carrying its typical Scottish lilt. "I know our viewers are eager to hear from you, especially given some of the recent developments in your life." Harry shifted slightly in his chair, his media-trained composure intact. "Thank you for having me, Lorraine. It's always a pleasure to be here. Now I have to ask," Lorraine continued, leaning forward slightly. "There's been quite a bit of speculation about your various projects and business ventures. Some critics have suggested that you're capitalizing on your royal connections, while simultaneously criticizing the very institution that gave you those connections. How do you respond to that?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Harry's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained measured. "I think that's a very reductive way of looking at it, Lorraine. Everything I do is about making a positive impact, about using whatever platform I have to help people. But surely you can understand why some people might see it as having your cake and eating it too." Lorraine pressed, her tone still professional, but with an edge that suggested she wasn't going to accept deflection. "You've been quite vocal about the constraints of royal life, the lack of freedom, the pressure from the media. Yet many of your current endeavors seem to rely heavily on the very royal status you've distanced yourself from." Harry's composure began to crack slightly. "I think you're oversimplifying a very complex situation. The work I'm doing now, the partnerships I've formed, they're about substance, not titles." "Are they though?" Lorraine shot back, her voice gaining strength. "Because when I look at your Netflix deal, your book deal, your speaking engagements, it's hard to ignore that Prince Harry commands a significantly higher fee than Harry Mountbatten, Windsor ever would. Isn't that precisely because of your royal connection?" The studio felt electric. Harry's media handlers, visible just off camera, exchanged worried glances. This wasn't going according to their carefully orchestrated plan. "You're putting words in my mouth," Harry replied, his voice now carrying a noticeable edge. "I've been transparent about my journey, about why I made the decisions I made. I don't think it's fair to suggest that everything I do is somehow calculated or inauthentic." Lorraine wasn't backing down. "I'm not suggesting it's calculated, Your Royal Highness. I'm asking whether you can see how it might appear contradictory to criticize an institution, while simultaneously benefiting from your association with it. It's a legitimate question that I think deserves a straightforward answer, and I think," Harry said, his voice rising slightly, "that question comes from a place of misunderstanding about what my life has actually been like, what my family has actually been through." "Your family," Lorraine repeated, seizing on the phrase. "Let's talk about that. You've made some very serious allegations about members of your family, about conversations that allegedly took place, about concerns that were raised. These are incredibly damaging claims that have affected real people. People who, by your own admission, can't respond publicly in the same way you can. How do you justify that?" The question landed like a bombshell. Harry's face flushed, and for the first time since the interview began, he looked genuinely angry. "I justify it by telling the truth, by refusing to stay silent about things that needed to be said." "But whose truth?" Lorraine countered, her voice now carrying the full weight of her journalistic experience. "You've presented your version of events, your interpretation of conversations, your feelings about situations, but you've done so in a very public forum, knowing full well that the other parties involved can't respond with the same freedom you have. Doesn't that seem unfair to you?" "Unfair?" Harry's voice cracked with emotion. "What's unfair is having to live with secrets and lies for years. What's unfair is watching the people you love suffer in silence because of archaic protocols and public relations strategies. I understand that you feel strongly about this, Lorraine said, her tone still firm but showing a hint of compassion. But can you not see how your approach, your very public revelations, might have caused pain? Two people you claim to love. Can you not acknowledge that there might have been other ways to handle these situations? Harry stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the studio floor. I think this interview is heading in a direction that I'm not comfortable with. Lorraine remained seated, her gaze steady. I'm asking you the questions that I think need to be asked, the questions that many people are thinking but perhaps don't have the opportunity to voice directly to you. These aren't questions, Harry shot back, his composure now completely abandoned. This is an ambush. This is exactly the kind of media manipulation that I've spent years trying to get away from. The tension in the studio was now palpable. Camera operators continued filming, unsure whether they should stop. Lorraine's production team watched from the control room, torn between protecting their guest and supporting their host's journalistic integrity. Media manipulation? Lorraine's voice cut through the studio tension like a blade. She remained perfectly composed in her chair, looking up at the standing prince with unwavering determination. Your Royal Highness, I'm a journalist. It's my job to ask difficult questions, not to provide you with a platform for unchallenged statements. If you can't handle legitimate scrutiny, perhaps you shouldn't be doing interviews. Harry's face was now visibly red, his hands clenched at his sides. Legitimate scrutiny? You're twisting everything I say, putting the worst possible interpretation on every answer I give. I'm asking you to explain contradictions in your public statements and actions, Lorraine replied coolly. If that feels like twisting, perhaps, you need to examine whether those contradictions actually exist. You don't know what you're talking about, Harry snapped, his royal training completely abandoned now. You sit here in your comfortable studio, judging situations you know nothing about, making assumptions about choices you've never had to make. Lorraine finally stood, matching his energy, but maintaining her professionalism. You're absolutely right. I don't know what it's like to be born into the royal family, but I do know what it's like to be held accountable for my words and actions. I know what it's like to face criticism and respond to it without attacking the questioner. This isn't criticism, Harry shot back. This is character assassination disguised as journalism. No, Lorraine said firmly, her Scottish accent becoming more pronounced as her own emotions rose. Character assassination would be me making personal attacks about your appearance, your family, your private relationships. What I'm doing is asking you to explain public statements you've made and public positions you've taken. There's a significant difference. Harry began pacing behind his chair, his agitation obvious. You're being deliberately confrontational. This isn't how interviews are supposed to work. How are they supposed to work then? Lorraine challenged. Am I supposed to ask you about your favorite color and your upcoming projects while ignoring the elephant in the room? Am I supposed to pretend that your very public criticisms of your family and the monarchy don't raise legitimate questions about your motivations and methods? You're supposed to show some basic respect, Harry replied, his voice now carrying a tone of wounded entitlement. I came here in good faith, expecting a reasonable conversation, not an interrogation. Lorraine's expression hardened. Respect isn't the same thing as deference, Your Royal Highness. I respect you enough to treat you like any other public figure who has made controversial statements and taken controversial actions. What you seem to want is special treatment, immunity from the kind of questioning that anyone else in your position would face. Special treatment? Harry's voice cracked with incredulity. I've been treated worse by the media than almost anyone alive. I've had my privacy invaded, my relationship scrutinized, my every move documented and criticized, and I'm genuinely sorry about that, Lorraine said, and for a moment her tone softened. No one should have to endure the kind of intrusion you experienced, especially as a child. But that doesn't give you a free pass now. It doesn't mean that when you make public statements, when you sign lucrative deals, when you make serious allegations about your family, that those things shouldn't be examined and questioned. Harry stopped pacing and fixed her with an intense stare. You think this is easy for me? You think I wanted any of this? I think, Lorraine said carefully, that you've made choices. Adult choices, and adults are held accountable for their choices. Regardless of what they experienced in childhood, regardless of how difficult those choices might have been, so I should have just stayed silent. Let the lies continue. Let my wife be destroyed. The way my mother was, the mention of his wife and mother seemed to unleash something in Harry that had been barely contained. His voice was now shaking with emotion. Lorraine took a deep breath. No one is saying you should have stayed silent. But there's a difference between speaking your truth and weaponizing your platform. There's a difference between protecting your family and publicly humiliating others. Weaponizing? Harry's voice rose to near shouting. I'm trying to protect my family, to break cycles of abuse and neglect that have gone on for generations. By doing what exactly? Lorraine pressed. By giving interviews that you know will be used to attack the very people you grew up with. By writing books that reveal private conversations and private moments. How is that protecting anyone? Because someone has to tell the truth, Harry said, his voice breaking slightly. Someone has to be willing to say that the system is broken, that it destroys people, that it needs to change. And you appointed yourself to that role, Lorraine asked. You decided that you were the one person qualified to make those judgments, to reveal those secrets, to tear down those relationships. Harry was silent for a long moment, his breathing heavy. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but no less intense. I didn't appoint myself to anything. I was pushed into this position by people who were supposed to protect me, supposed to support me. That may be true, Lorraine conceded, but the question remains, was your response proportionate? Was it fair? Was it the right thing to do? Fair. Harry laughed bitterly. Nothing about my life has ever been fair. Nothing about the treatment my wife received was fair. Nothing about watching my family close ranks and protect an institution at the expense of actual people was fair. So your solution was to become unfair in return? Lorraine asked quietly. The question seemed to hit Harry like a physical blow. He stared at her for several seconds, his mouth opening and closing as if he wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words. I don't have to listen to this, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't have to sit here and be judged by someone who has no idea what they're talking about. You're absolutely right, Lorraine agreed. You don't have to listen to this. You can walk out of here right now. But if you do, if you can't handle these questions, then perhaps you need to ask yourself why that is. Perhaps you need to consider whether the problem isn't the questions themselves, but the fact that you don't have good answers for them. Harry's hands were shaking now. Whether from anger or emotion wasn't clear. The studio had gone completely silent, except for the hum of cameras and equipment. Even the crew had stopped their usual background movements, transfixed by the confrontation unfolding before them. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap. Harry's chest rose and fell rapidly, his eyes darting between Lorraine and the cameras that continued to roll. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely controlled. You want to know why I don't have good answers, he said, his words coming out in a rush. Because there are no good answers. Because every choice I made was impossible. Because no matter what I did, someone was going to get hurt. Lorraine's expression remained steady, but there was something almost compassionate in her eyes now. Then why not say that? Why not admit that you made difficult choices in impossible circumstances, that you might have handled things differently, that you regret some of the pain that resulted? Because that's not what people want to hear, Harry replied, his voice growing louder again. They want villains and heroes. They want simple stories about good and evil. They can't handle complexity. So, you gave them what they wanted, Lorraine asked. You played the role of the wronged prince, the victim of an evil system. Harry's face contorted with rage. I didn't play any role. I told my truth. Your truth, Lorraine. Your version, your interpretation, your feelings about events that involved other people who don't have the luxury of responding publicly. They have every luxury, Harry snapped. They have the entire British establishment protecting them, making excuses for them, covering up their mistakes. And you have what? Lorraine shot back. Global media platforms, multi-million-pound deals, the sympathy of half the world. You're not exactly powerless here, Your Royal Highness. Don't call me that, Harry said suddenly, his voice sharp. Don't use my title when you're attacking everything it represents. Lorraine raised an eyebrow. You want to have it both ways again. You want the respect that comes with the title when it suits you. But you want to distance yourself from it when it becomes inconvenient. I want to be treated like a human being, Harry said, his voice cracking with emotion. I want to be able to protect my family without being torn apart for it. I want to be able to tell the truth without being accused of betrayal. Then tell The whole truth, Lorraine challenged. Tell us about the good times, the support you received, the love that existed.